While the rest of the world tore itself apart, the Balkans watched and waited. No convoys from NATO crossed the Adriatic. No European brigades assembled in Thessaloniki, and the politicians in Brussels had long since stopped returning calls. The peninsula was on its own. In Skopje, the parliament made a quiet but defiant move. The name North Macedonia was gone. Once more, it was the Republic of Macedonia. The law passed with cheers in the chamber, but across the borders the reaction was far from polite. In Sofia, the foreign minister called it a reversal of history. In Athens, opposition leaders accused it of deliberate provocation. In Pristina, Albanian language news called it a nationalist step. For weeks, nothing happened. Soldiers drilled, ministers made speeches, newspapers filled columns with speculation. Then one Tuesday before dawn, the first explosion came. Not in the Balkans, but far to the south, in the eastern Mediterranean. The Turkish Navy steamed toward Cyprus in formation, destroyers and troop carriers cutting through black water. Radar on the Cypriot coast lit up with dozens of returns. Within minutes, the first shells landed, throwing sand and rock into the air. Cyprus had a small standing army, lightly equipped, barely enough to cover its own coastlines and cities. Turkey, by contrast, brought hundreds of armored vehicles, artillery pieces, and aircraft to the operation. Coastal guns answered, spitting fire at the incoming landing craft. A few boats shuddered under direct hits, spilling men into the surf. But the Turkish ships kept coming. At sunrise, armored vehicles rumbled ashore, pushing through trenches dug hastily the night before. Helicopters ferried troops inland to choke points before the defenders could organize. In Nicosia, the president sent an encrypted plea. Nicosia to Athens. They're on the ground in force. Without immediate air and naval support, we cannot hold until nightfall. In Athens, the reply came after a pause. Athens. Nicosia. Fleet is mobilizing, but the sea is against us. Hold as long as you can. The holding didn't last. By dusk, the red flag with the white crescent hung over government buildings. Cyprus was gone in a day. The shock of the fall rippled north. In Sofia, the Bulgarian General Staff met in a closed session. They had long kept plans for defensive security along the Macedonian border. Now, with Europe's eyes elsewhere, they would act. At dawn the next morning, artillery thundered through the hills east of Delchevo. Bulgarian armored brigades crossed the border under a covering barrage. Villages on the slopes of the Kosovo Mountains woke to the thunder of treads on asphalt. Macedonia's army was small but determined. Against Bulgaria's stronger forces, which moved with speed and firepower, the defenders fought from behind stone walls and makeshift barricades. The first wave of enemy vehicles was slowed, some destroyed with anti-tank fire at close range. Retreating engineers demolished a key bridge over the Brigalnica River, delaying the advance for precious hours. But the Bulgarians pressed forward in two spearheads, one south toward Strumica, the other north toward Berovo. The battle for Strumica turned the city into a fortress. Apartment blocks became sniper nests. Streets were choked with overturned buses, sandbags, and rubble from collapsed facades. Grenades burst in stairwells. Machine guns rattled from windows. Smoke rolled over the rooftops, mixing with the winter fog. Berovo's defense was just as stubborn. The steep streets gave the defenders a vantage over every turn. They fought room to room, alley to alley, until ammunition ran low. And yet, there was no surrender. Orders came down for a coordinated fighting withdrawal. Under cover of darkness, Macedonian troops slipped west, leaving wrecked vehicles and mined roads behind them. By the third day, Bulgaria controlled a swath of eastern Macedonia, from the high ridges down to the outskirts of Strumica and Berovo. The rest of the front stabilized, but not for long. In Skopje, the president sent a direct message to Belgrade. Skopje to Belgrade. Eastern territories are falling. If we lose more ground, there will be nothing between them and you. The Serbian president replied within the hour. Belgrade to Skopje. Send coordinates of enemy logistics. Air support will fly before dawn. And so it did. At sunrise, Serbian strike aircraft swept in low over the Bregalnica Valley, targeting supply convoys and forward fuel depots. Explosions echoed in the mountains, slowing the Bulgarian advance to a crawl. That night, in a secure video call, the two leaders formalized their cooperation. It would be called the Balkan Shield, a mutual defense pact aimed at resisting any incursion, east or west. Serbia brought hundreds of artillery systems and thousands of troops to the alliance, tipping the balance on paper. But the real question was whether paper strength could hold in the field. And in the mountains, the next battle was about to begin. Just as Macedonian commanders began to breathe, new trouble erupted in the northwest. Armed insurgents crossed the mountains from Kosovo and Albania, targeting the Shara Planina region. Their goal was to break through to Tetovo. In the narrow passes near Vece, Macedonian troops held defensive lines dug into the slopes. The peaks loomed above like silent watchers, their white ridges masking the movements of the enemy until the last second. Fighting was brutal and close. Rifles cracking in short bursts, machine gun fire cutting across the frozen air. Mortar shells burst among the rocks, shattering patches of ice that tumbled like avalanches into the gullies below. For 2 days, the battle raged in the snow. Attack and counterattack, neither side yielding more than a few meters. Night brought no rest. Tracer fire arced over the dark ridgelines, and flares lit up the passes like ghostly daylight. When the weather turned, a blizzard swept across the high ground, muffling the roar of battle. The insurgents slipped back over the ridges under the storm's cover, leaving the slopes in Macedonian hands. The relief was short-lived. Before dawn, 2 days later, a second push came. This time not at the narrow passes, but deeper along the Polog Valley. Skirmishes erupted near Tearks, Brvenica, and the approaches to Želino. Insurgent units used goat paths and forest trails to swing wide, attempting to bypass strong points and hit the defenders from the rear. Macedonian patrols responded with ambushes in the pine forests, bursts of fire echoing down into the valley floor. By midweek, the northwest was a patchwork of contested ground. Villages changed hands in hours, some twice in a single day. Burned-out vehicles marked where ambushes had taken place. Roadblocks appeared overnight, only to be abandoned the next morning as the front shifted again. In Tetovo, the garrison turned every approach into a fortress. Road junctions were reinforced with sandbags, makeshift barricades, and overlapping fields of fire. Observation posts dotted the ridgelines, reporting every movement in the valleys below. Helicopter crews flew low over the fields to drop supplies where trucks couldn't reach, their rotors whipping snow into blinding clouds. Meanwhile, on the eastern front, Bulgarian patrols began to probe again. Nothing like the early assault, just small reconnaissance teams, slipping across the border to map Macedonian defenses or plant mines on mountain roads. In the hills near Kriva Palanka, a Macedonian outpost reported contact at dawn, exchanging fire with an unseen enemy before the attackers faded back into the forests. It was enough to remind everyone in Skopje, the East was only sleeping, not quiet. In the capital, the president sent a secure message to Belgrade. Skopje to Belgrade. Two fronts active. Northwest is unstable, east beginning to stir. If pressure builds on both, holding lines will become impossible. The Serbian president's reply came within the hour. Belgrade to Skopje. Secure Tetovo. We will take measures to relieve pressure from the north. Stand firm until then. The message was brief, but in the war rooms of Skopje, its meaning was clear. Serbia was preparing something big. As night fell over the Shar Planina, the sound of sporadic gunfire echoed through the valleys. Patrols moved under cover of darkness. Mines were laid along likely infiltration routes, and the defenders braced for another dawn attack. The eastern mountains stood in uneasy silence. The northwest burned with constant skirmishes, and far to the north, armored engines were warming up in Serbian depots. The map of the Balkans was about to shift again.